Hi everyone, welcome to another workshop presented to you by the Writing Success Center. My name is Genesis, I'm one of the faculty here at the Writing Success Center, and today we're going to be talking about getting ready to read strategies for previewing a text. A brief overview of what we're going to be discussing today. So we're going to be talking about what is a text preview, why should you prepare to read as opposed to just diving right in, strategies to help you get ready to read, along with some reading activities so that you can put these strategies into action. To get the most out of this workshop, we recommend that you complete the accompanying activity worksheet that can be found in the module that you found this video. Completing the worksheet will also demonstrate to your instructor that you have watched the video to its entirety and will make you eligible for any extra credit or assignment completion that this may have been assigned. We also recommend that you take your time. Feel free to pause and rewind parts that were confusing or went too fast. It's the beauty of a video is you can really take your time with it. So what is a text preview? So a text preview is a process that you do before you start reading. And this is when you actually take a moment to prepare questions to help set up expectations, help make connections between the class, between your class and the journal, article, book, etc., that your professor may have assigned. So you're referring back to discussions and class notes. You're skimming or you're scanning the intro, conclusion, or abstract to get an idea of what the reading is going to be about. And you're really thinking about what you want to learn from the reading and thinking about how it can be applied to your essay. So all of this is to demonstrate that reading is an active and thinking process, which is the reason why you should preview a text. So prior to, or in contrary to our understanding of what reading looks like, sometimes we think that reading is just a passive process where you're just making your way through the article. But when we do that, how many of us have actually gotten to the end of a page and then are stuck thinking, I don't remember what I read, or I don't understand a single word that I just read. And so that is what we are trying to avoid, because effective readers know that when they read, what they read is supposed to make sense. You're supposed to have an understanding of what the writer was trying to say, and you are supposed to make your own interpretation of their words. So previewing a text, yes, it's a little bit of extra work in the forefront of the process, but it's to help you give direction, purpose, and understanding to the reading. And it can help you connect the reading to the class and prepare for the essay. And ultimately, it's to help save you a little bit of time too, because these strategies not only help you set up an expectation for your reading, but these are strategies that you can also use just to find the information that you need for the class and really help you specialize and focus in on the content as opposed to just trying to make sense of this larger text that you were assigned. So before we go any further and talk about the strategies, I want you to take a moment to complete the reflection activity. And this can be found in the accompanying worksheet that is found in the module. And I want you to think about what makes reading a text difficult or confusing. When you're assigned a reading, do you take any steps to prepare for what you're about to read, such as reviewing class notes, reading an abstract, etc.? Why or why not? So now the strategies, which is what you're all waiting for. And so the first strategy that I recommend is analyzing the features of a text. So a lot of print sources will have visual, graphic, and text features to help organize information and highlight important ideas, key concepts, and really just providing any additional information that you might need in order to fully understand what the text is talking about. And this is all to help create a predictable pattern, which can help you make connections and really focus on the content. And so these features include headings, subheadings, table of contents, index, glossary, prefaces, paragraphs separated by spacing, bulleted lists, sidebars, footnotes, illustrations, pictures, diagrams, charts, italics, and bold. So it's a lot of different features, but ultimately their purpose is to help train your eye to find certain information. And once you find that information, you're then able to focus on the patterns that the information creates. And this will help you better navigate the reading and then just better prepare for what the reading is going to be about. Another strategy that you can use is guiding questions. So creating guiding questions for yourself in order to activate prior knowledge and experience and really think about the ideas that are presented in the reading. Your professor might provide you with some of these, but you can also write them yourself. And when you're writing them, you can think about the topics and ideas that you have discussed in class and ask yourself, what do you hope the text provides you in regards to these topics? So this is why we say sometimes you have to refer back to your class notes and discussions because the reading is helping you build on those ideas that you're discussing in class. It can also help to make personal connections with the topic so that you can integrate new knowledge with background experience and prior knowledge. We always say that you are a vast wealth of knowledge and our personal experiences are sometimes reflected in these texts. So really think about if you have been discussing certain topics that you're like, oh, this kind of sounds familiar, how might that relate to this new source that you were assigned? Right, so now we're jumping into our second reading activity, again, completed in the accompanying worksheet. And I want you to choose a reading from one of your classes. It does not have to be English, but using your class notes, I want you to write 3 pre-reading questions that can help you guide your reading. Take into consideration any main ideas that you have discussed in the class and how can you relate to the reading. Now we're going to be focusing on finding organizational patterns. And so organizational patterns are the way that information is grouped and ordered in these sources. And ultimately, the organization helps you understand the ideas and the relations between different ideas. There's different organizational patterns or there's different strategies to help you identify these organizational patterns, such as skimming, scanning, rereading, making predictions, making connections. For this workshop, we're going to be focusing on the first two, which are skimming and scanning. But also keep in mind that a lot of texts might combine these organizational patterns. And it can be really helpful if you create a graphic organizer for yourself, such as a timeline, flowchart, or a mind map to help make the relationship between ideas that much clearer. So I did mention that the 2 strategies that we're primarily going to be focused on to help you identify these organizational patterns are skimming and scanning to help preview a text. So these 2 are very similar, but they have different roles or purposes. Skimming is when you're reading quickly to get the main idea of a paragraph, page, chapter, or article. And ultimately, it's to help you have a general sense of a text to determine whether or not the information is going to be useful for you. Are you going to use the information just based off of a quick, based off of a quick skim? Is that information going to be useful for your essay? And so again, I talked about earlier how all these strategies are to help train your eye. And that's what you're doing. You're training your eye to read the first few paragraphs. Maybe you're reading 2 to 3 middle paragraphs and then the final 2 to 3 paragraphs. And maybe just focusing on the topic and concluding sentences of each. And this is just to help you just get a general idea of what the essay is about, how the writer created their argument, and what is their final conclusion. It might also help to glance at pictures, diagrams, or charts. Scanning, on the other hand, helps you locate a single fact, date, name, word, without really trying to read or understand the rest of your piece. So scanning is really just to help you locate a single piece of information. Skimming, general understanding. Scanning, single piece of information. And so to skim, you want to make sure that you know your text well. And this is where having an understanding of what the visual features of a text are, so that you can make note of how the information is arranged on the page. So this is where you're using those text features, such as headings, diagrams, etc., to help guide you. And you're moving your eyes vertically and diagonally around the page to find the exact information that you want. So that's the other thing. You really want to keep in mind what exactly it is that you're looking for. And these two strategies are very helpful when you're looking at the organizational patterns. So they're really helpful to for you to determine how the information how the information is organized on the page. So there's quite a few. One is spatial order, where ideas are arranged in an order to relating to geographic or spatial locations, such as left to right, top to bottom, foreground to background. And it's used in description, maps, diagrams, and drawings. So the signal words will include above, across from, among, behind, below, down, in front of, between, etc. Information might also be organized based off order of importance. So ideas, as it does, based on how important it is. And so you'll see this in persuasive writing, reports, explanations, news reports, and descriptions. And the signal words include always, beginning, firstly, finally, following, in addition, most important, etc. So anything that's just giving you like, hey, this is really important piece of information, not that important, it'll tell you what kind of organizational pattern it is. Cause and effect is when you're demonstrating how, when you're relating the results of a series of events to show that one caused the other, and signal words include as a result of, because begins with, causes, consequently, due to, effects of, how, if, then, in order to, therefore, so that. Basically anything that has to say because X happened, Y is the result. That is cause and effect. Generalization is when information is arranged into general statements with supporting examples, and you will see this at the beginning or end of a report, an essay, summary, or an article. The signal words include additionally, always, because of, therefore, for example, furthermore, generally, however, and in conclusion. Time order is when information is displayed in chronological order, and you will find this in reports, biographies, news articles, procedures, instructions, or steps in a process. And signal words include after, before, during, finally, following, immediately, initially, next, now, until. Anything that has to do with time is time order. And compare and contrast, where details are arranged to show similarities and differences between ideas. So signal words include although, as well as, compared with, either, however, similar to, unlike yet, etc. And the reason I include the signal words for these organizational patterns is because when you're skimming or scanning your the article or the source that you're using, those signal words or transition phrases are going to help you link ideas and help you follow the flow of information. So it'll help you understand, again, what is the purpose of the reading before you actually read in more detail. And it can help you when you're just trying to find certain sections or main points in your essay. So if your professor is asking you, how did the author of this article support their thesis, having an understanding of the organizational pattern, maybe they used order of importance, will help you identify the different arguments that the writer may have used to support their ideas or their topics. And that brings us to the end of our workshop for today. In summary, previewing strategies will help you prepare for the reading, and it's just to help you have a better understanding of the material. You can preview a text by analyzing the different features of a text, the organizational patterns, skimming, scanning, preparing questions to help guide your reading. And it's a bit of an extra step, but again, it's about making sure that you reach the end of the article and you're not left with that feeling of, I don't know what I just read. You will have a better understanding and be able to create meaning and be able to ultimately put it in your own words. We also welcome you to come visit us in the Writing Success Center, in person and in Zoom. Our fall and spring hours are Monday through Thursday from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. and Fridays from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. We're also open in the summer from Monday through Thursday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Thank you.